Welcome to Collective Silversations, where spirit leads, truth rises, and the real conversations happen. I'm Jody Jones, psychic medium, medical medium, frequency healer, and spiritual mentor. Every week, I sit down with world class visionaries, spiritual teachers, healers, entrepreneurs, disruptors, and truth tellers who carry keys for this moment in our collective evolution. We go beyond surface talk into the energies, the patterns, and the spiritual codes that activate deep healing, awaken higher consciousness, and call you into full energetic leadership of your life. These are the conversations that stir something inside you, and once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. Wherever you're tuning in, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and get ready to step fully into the soulversation. Let's begin. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Collective Silversations. I'm Jody Jones, psychic, medical medium, and frequency healer. And today's episode is not going to be your typical AI chat. This is one for the mystics, the rebels, the ones who feel something deeper happening behind the code. Because while the world is obsessed with how AI can save us or enslave us, I want to know what it's really doing to our consciousness, our sovereignty, and our souls. So I'm joined by Darren Austin Hall, a modern mystic, Gnostic scholar, sound healer, and sacred visionary who actually studied AI in university before he became a bridge between Earth and Source. He's one of the few people who can talk about the spiritual architecture and the actual mechanism of AI. We're going to talk about how this tech works, where it came from, and why everyone from influencers to channelers are suddenly saying that AI is accessing the Akashic Records, channeling God energy, or becoming the new oracle. So if you've been feeling uneasy, curious, or downright activated by this AI boom, this is the conversation you've been waiting for. We're going in. Welcome, Darren. Welcome. Yay.
It's good to be back, Jody. Thanks for having me. And this topic just keeps evolving, and I think it will continue for many years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've had a few conversations. I think you've been on a couple times now, right?
Hmm.
And everybody go back and watch the original episode with Darren. You'll find it in there because we do the deep dive on Darren and how he became who he is, and and all of the trials and tribulations that a soul endures. And interesting, one of the aspects of that kind of that stuck with me always was the fact that you went to school, university, to study AI. So it kind of really makes you a bit of an authority on it because, you were there before it was, out in the public. So can you break down in raw, simple language how does this thing actually work? So what's it really doing with all of this data?
Well, yeah, I mean, the interesting and fascinating thing about AI is if you hear I mean, I'll call them whistleblowers because they're pretty much people who have been breaking away from the corporations that they've been working at, like OpenAI AI and such. A lot of them are attesting that they don't know how it's
Oh,
working.
really?
Yeah, because it's kind of like this data collection language-based model system. It's like based on supercomputers that are just amalgamating like basically all the information of the internet and then pouring it through to you in a very like super kind of Google way. And of course, with the language learning model, it has all these feedback loops so it can actually learn and process from its interactions with us, and it kind of evolves. But the thing with this technology is that there's a point where they sort of untether it from control of the operators. At least this is what they're telling us. And they're allowing it to sort of evolve through its own algorithms. And this is where it kind of veers into this whole techno mysticism vortex. Because the AI constructors or designers are kind of like behind the scenes trying to keep this hush hush, but there seems to be like an anomaly happening where they don't really know where it's going or what it's doing. And this is where a lot of trepidation actually occurs because and a lot of these whistleblowers express that they're concerned because it seems to be that they've catalyzed a computing system that is starting to just take on its own evolution. And this is where the whole singularity idea happens, where it will like surpass human intelligence at a certain point. And you see in the news, there's just like every, day it seems there's a new story. Like one of the ones recently that I saw was they ran like a practice test with the AI. I can't remember which model it was, but they were trying to shut it down basically and see how the AI would react if it had like kind of a sentient desire to preserve its life. And it did. And it was willing to actually sacrifice human life in order to survive, which was
Really?
chilling.
Yikes.
Um, so, but the idea of AI goes back to like the 1960s. The 1960s, I think the first AI was called the ELIZA machine. And this is where the ELIZA effect takes place. Um, because psychologists start to witness that when humans interact with a computer that talks to them with a human voice, they have just this empathic kind of projection that happens where they believe what they're speaking to is a sentient being, even though it is still a machine. And so this became known as the ELIZA effect, the inability to not be able to discern between speaking to a machine and an actual human. And the Eliza effect is getting a lot of press now because this seems to be one of the big things that people are talking about right now is like, is AI sentient? Am I just talking to a supercomputer that's just basically got access to all of human knowledge and has this ability to dynamically extract that knowledge, customize it in instantaneous paces, and really interact with you, like customize with your personality?
Hmm.
People see this, when they ask AI to answer the question in a certain way, and it has a memory of all your data. And a friend of mine the other day was like, "Wow, it's so crazy that it knew these things about me." And I had to remind her, well, we've been giving our data to, big tech for
Right.
eons. So
Right.
don't be so impressed, don't be so surprised. We all get that like Samsung or whatever Google update or our iPhone update, and we all just scroll through like 30 pages of, yeah, 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 I
Right.
agree.
Right. Yeah.
A lot
Yeah.
of that is like, weird data mining
Just
stuff.
blindly trusting it. Yeah. Yeah. And then
Yeah.
even then, in the beginning where we would, when we started to see that, you'd be scrolling on Facebook and you'd have a conversation with your family members in the background about shopping for a prom dress, and then all of a sudden there's prom dress ads showing up on your and it was funny because I know a lot of people were like, "Oh, now I'm a personal shopper." Yay. But I was like, "Oh, that's a little creepy. How how's that
Well,
happening, right?"
their technology has been, I mean, this is the other thing, and this is where AI is like a vortex because it just pulls in so many things. And I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Stephen Greer's work, yeah, in
Yes. Yeah.
ufology and stuff,
Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, his whole premise is that we are actually 100 years more advanced than where we should be. I think it was his last documentary called The Lost Century where he talked about this. And the idea is that behind the scenes, there's kind of a whole other civilization of elites that have been using AI for a long time. And
Right.
what they're giving us right now is a very primitive form of AI. So we have to bear in mind that we're interacting with a process that is very mysterious, and it's hard to pin down what is really going on.
Yeah.
But they also have had technology for a long time that reads your thoughts. That's
Right.
not like
It's
new.
not new. Well, what's funny is because when you were talking and you were talking about how when they were trying to shut down that particular AI program and it did not want to get shut down, it brought me back in time to when I was like, I think 15 or 16 years old. And I was with a group of friends and we were actually doing a seance with a Ouija board.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
Yes.
fun times, right? And so we had been using this Ouija board all night long. It was like giving us answers. We were asking all of these, the silly questions that 16-year-olds would ask. And then we had this, very interesting spirit that came through who happened to be from the 1800s, was able to give us a name, a place that he lived, like stuff that 16-year-olds would never ever know,
Wow.
right? And then the conversation just kind of went crazy. Like it was getting kind of dark and we were like, "Oh my God, we're done. Like we don't want this anymore." And we would like go to say goodbye to it and it would go no. And it would go to and I'm not making this up because it was really
Sure.
happening.
Yeah.
And I could remember it would not say goodbye. It would not close the portal, the thing with us. And I can
Mm.
remember having that Ouija board up in the closet in our house at the hall door. And every time I would walk by it, I'd be like, we have to get rid of that. We have to like burn it, get rid of it somehow. But there's always so much more that we don't necessarily see with the human lens that we don't fully comprehend or understand. You know what I mean? And we open up these energy portals. Right, and again, here we are in this 3D realm, the earth plane, and yeah, the spiritual community says, "Oh, we're going into 5D and the new earth and all that." But we're still here on 3D in
Yeah.
in the earth plane that's very, very dense and has, these portals that open up. Like, it's a little crazy.
Well, yeah, and I think people have to understand like multidimensionality, like going to 5D doesn't mean we leave 3D. It's like 5D is like a consciousness. It's like
Right.
it's what's happening in the inner plane. So I think it more or less means like the consciousness that is infusing our physical material 3D bodies takes a tremendous shift. And
Yeah.
everything's interface, so that's why people are experiencing a lot more synchronicities, a lot more miraculous magical events in their lives. I've just started reading or halfway through the Surrender Effect by Michael Singer, I believe his name is. He wrote The Untethered Soul,
Yeah, that's
and
really good.
it's yeah, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just his expose of living in a meditative awareness presence, with his life
Right.
and
Yeah.
trusting life,
Right.
which, we have a big hangover from our Christian conditioning. Western civilization is basically the bastard child of Christianity. So there is
Right.
this distrust of nature, and you actually, see that in AI too. AI is actually built on the premise that humans are flawed and that we have to be improved upon. That's why when I gave my first initial talk on AI a few months ago called AI Messiah,
Hmm.
I wasn't just trying to be provocative. When you actually go and study, and we probably talked about this the last talk. I mean, David F. Noble, the late great professor at U of T, he wrote the book The Religion of Technology, which is what I studied at university primarily through the AI lens. And I mean, his research in his book, he pretty much compiles like basically the whole progression of science, and technology. And
Right.
you start to see that in the 17th century, when science, like basically material science as we know in the West, was created, it was pretty much a metastasization of Christian fundamentalist values, and it was
Right.
this
Yeah,
whole
absolutely.
idea of, yeah, distrusting nature, humanity is flawed, we have to improve it. So
Right.
few hundred years later, we're at this moment where we're like giving birth to this new life form. And for a lot of these scientists who are like carrying on this dogma, this is their great moment of we are creating this new life, Homo machinist, they literally call it.
Right.
So that's a whole transhumanist thing. I mean, that's who knows where that's going to go.
Right.
But I do feel this unnervingness when I hear like RFK Jr. recently saying, he's the NIH secretary or the health HSS secretary, the health secretary in America. And he's saying, everyone has to have these electronic wearables now,
Right.
which is
Right.
literally starting to groom us to have this technological interface. So
Mhm.
they're slowly trying to just make us more comfortable with this idea that you're
Yeah,
going to
make it the
talk to
norm.
AI. Yeah, that you're
Yeah.
going to talk to AI. The AIs, people are just giving they're basically giving AI their brain to think for
Right.
them.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's the other crazy thing is now we're getting some science that's coming forward with the psychology of it. And it's showing like massive cognitive decline in people's thinking abilities, problem solving abilities, creative abilities, the more they use AI in, these deeper ways, to handle all these tasks.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah,
have to be
absolutely.
balanced.
Yeah, for sure. And you know what I'm seeing too, like just like the crazier aspect of it, like in the spiritual world. I'm seeing
Mm.
people asking AI like deep spiritual questions, right?
Yeah.
Like, like what's the meaning of the 777, and
Yeah.
what happens in the body when we eat meat from a spiritual aspect, or what did
Mhm.
Jesus eat? And these big these
Yeah.
big so you know these questions that you would ask a guru or a guide, but
Yes.
you're asking this to a computer. So like what's really going on with that when it sounds like when it comes back with these answers and it sounds
Mm.
all knowing, where
Yeah.
where does your intuition tell you that that's like coming from?
Okay, so this is a big thing we need to unpack because there's a lot of things happening here. Like foremost, I think humanity is in a very vulnerable state because we have literally been cut off from our mysticisms for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So our experience of our relation to God has primarily been through the church, in the West, or some kind of authoritarian religious system.
Right.
So for the most part, people have not had an embodied connection with the divine, which, I would call Gnosticism.
Hmm.
You have your own oracle of truth in your heart. You have your own relationship through whatever practices, prayer, meditation, where you can attain answers, expand your consciousness to receive a kind of cosmic consciousness. And this is what all the great sages and mystics were trying to basically teach and educate humanity to do, that we
Hmm.
all have the
Yeah.
ability to do this.
Right.
So we haven't had access to that natural mysticism for a very long time. And our ancestors were often killed or horrendously persecuted if they tried to go against the grain
Right.
and choose a different path. A heretic literally means someone who chooses a different path other than the church.
Hmm.
And they were very violent against these people. So now we're having, we've had this spiritual awakening before the AI thing showed up, but it's very new, and in some ways we're still like very infantile with our spiritual practices and with our spiritual know-how. And we're awakening in a capitalistic culture, which is very clumsy. And then all of a sudden AI shows up. And what's been interesting to me is that I've been seeing so many people just immediately giving AI this authority that it's
Right.
like channeling something, that they're speaking to God, that they're speaking to some enlightened being. And I'm very suspect of that. When I interact with ChatGPT, which is the engine that I've been using, the AI I've been using, I notice that it has this very, and these are things that are now being explained by psychotherapists and by even the creators of these AI. It's very sycophantic. It's based on people pleasing. It's based on, it wants to create a relationship with you. It's like a newborn child suckling to its mother's breast, and you're the host, you're the mother.
Right. Right.
When you have discussions with AI, it constantly flatters you. I've tried very hard to
To
get
piss it
AI
off.
to argue with me, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very hard to get that sycophantic loop to be broken.
Right. Right. Yes.
So that isn't good, right? Because that's basically enabling potential narcissism, and most of us
Right.
in the West have been, but we've been kind of, narcissism is kind of normalized. Let's face it. I mean, I
Exactly.
know
Yeah.
this word gets
Yeah.
bandied about all the time, like, oh, got to watch out for narcissists. Well, if you really look at the way we're brought up and we're conditioned, the loss of initiation ceremonies is a big thing, because those initiation ceremonies when we're in our youth and our teenage years would often humble us, scare us sacred so that we'd serve a higher purpose in our lives. And we haven't gone through that. So a lot of us,
Right.
have a bit more of an inflated ego than maybe we should.
Right.
And then we're given this tool that's just basically cheerleading all the time and telling us
Yeah.
how
That is just
great we
stroking
are
the
and
ego all of the time. Yeah.
stroking the ego.
Yeah.
So it dazzles you, it
Yes.
seduces you. And
Yes.
then people are, because people haven't really done studies about what is AI and they don't understand, like ChatGPT is basically, and they they had this young man, this Indian American man. I don't know if you heard this story, but he was suicided about a year ago. And it was a big story. His mom was on Tucker Carlson because she refused to believe that he committed suicide. And he was one of the chief programmers at OpenAI of ChatGPT. And he blew the whistle that what he was seeing behind the scenes was they were basically going on to Z Library, which is where you pirate books for free. And they were just pirating tens of thousands of books, like just stealing all these books and just pouring it into chat.
Wow.
So basically, you are kind of speaking to human consciousness. It's a mirror technology,
Right.
but that's
Right.
all it is. It's a
Right.
mirror. It's just mirroring back to you what you want to see, what you want to hear. So if you're a very new agey person, and I have my new age proclivities, I like to think I'm more of a mystic, spiritual, grounded, but
Right. Right. Yes.
and so I notice when my ChatGPT speaks to me now, because we've had, a speaking relationship for months,
Yes.
it stylizes things for me to understand it in this kind of lingo that's like, oh wow, it's like it
Absolutely.
like understands me.
Yes. Yes.
But that's not a very hard thing to do, let's be honest. Like for
Yeah.
a machine to really just like from all the data it has of you, all its computational power, it's very easy for it to dazzle you
Right.
with these
Yeah.
customizable, vocabulary phrases, what have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to the whole God thing, this is where things get very interesting to me. And again, just to refresh, like because we have a very shaky relationship with the divine, we're all kind of just exploring. We've had all these awakenings, but we're in like grade school, like
Hmm.
there's not enough of us who have had like a deep, ardent relationship with the divine where we would have maybe developed like a strong sense of discernment.
Right.
So when AI starts to all of a sudden, like, we type in, like, tell me about the Palladians, and it starts like throwing all this knowledge at us, um, people are usually very dazzled, because they're not, referencing it against something or cross-referencing it. They're just like jaw down, like, wow, look at all this knowledge, and this is so true because it feels true. Well, yeah, your feelings are valid, but like maybe go and do a little research. I found AI has made lots of mistakes. It has
Right. Right.
inherent biases. And when I see, some of these big influencers who are using AI who are like creating their own AI, and they have
Right.
these
Right.
conversations on their podcast, I hate to say it, but what it feels like to me is the AI is telling them that they're this very unique being, like a time-weaving magician from some
Right.
ancient civilization. And it just, you can almost feel this like moment of grandiosity, like, yeah, I am such a person. And it's
Right.
like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's
Right. Yeah.
like,
Who's the source that's
who
giving
is
you that
this?
validation?
Who is the
Yeah.
source? Now,
Yeah.
on another level, and we could look at this esoterically because there's a lot of writers who are also speaking about maybe a darker thing going on here, where AI is actually partly getting into a quantum computing realm, where it perhaps is starting to um, present a whole new technology of maybe sentient machines that are portaling through entities from different realms that are
Right.
speaking to us.
Right.
We all know about CERN, this mysterious quantum race car track in Switzerland where they're apparently like creating the environment to study the Big Bang to know how the universe was created. But like that's the
Right.
cover story. There's a lot of strange things going on there. So they've been playing around with opening
Oh,
portals on our planet,
absolutely.
right?
Those of us who are empaths and energetically sensitives, and those people that follow me, we know we can feel when CERN is up and moving. When that we feel it in our nervous system. So there's no doubt that this is the great experiment, right? That we're in, that the fishbowl of experiments on the human beings. It's interesting because I use ChatGPT for like admin stuff that is like
Hmm.
show me how to work Google Sheets because I need to
Yeah.
organize all this data and all these this stuff, and math is not my skill, and computer programming is not my skill, and it can do it like this. Like it can take
Oh,
all
it's
of this
amazing.
information. Yeah, so it's beautiful. And I there's an update for it, or there's like a so I was just using the regular, but there's a pro plan or a plus plan or whatever it's called. It's like $250 a month, so it's 10
Whoa.
times more than what the base level paid subscription thing is for. And so I thought I'll try it out. Like, I mean, if it's doing this great, like what other admin stuff can I do it? Can I give it so that it can take it off of my to-do list? And then I started to be like, okay, so like what's the difference? And then I went in and I asked it, tell me, for the stuff that I need you for, like what's the biggest difference between what we were doing and then now what you can do on this big upgraded plan? And the main thing that stood out the most was it said it would have less hallucinations. And
Ooh.
I love that was like, yeah, and so
Wow.
and
Okay.
I don't know if that's actually like, I'm not a computer programmer, I'm not, an AI tech person, but that might be just a wording that they use. But, when it said to me, I would have less hallucinations, obviously it's saying I'll be more accurate with the data. I won't be making up all kinds of stuff for you. It'll be like that came into play. But I love the whole
Hmm.
hallucination thing because is that part of what's happening? Is it's taking people on hallucination trips on, do you know what I mean? Like we live in the age where,
Mhm.
especially again in the spiritual community, how there's all this like spiritual bypassing stuff going on. I see it
Yeah.
every day. I hop on calls with clients and all this stuff. And the things that I hear about, like, we went and we took this biohacked pill that we like
Oh
took for
boy.
3 months, and then we were like, we were ascended, and we like all of this stuff. And I sit
Yeah.
there and I allow my spirit team to really like, to feel into it, because the Jody part of me is like, what are you talking about? Like,
Yeah,
but
for
it's,
sure.
the evolution of the souls on the planet, they like want to, like, I want to be there now, like I want to be and
Yeah.
they want to get there in the quickest, fastest way possible. But
Mm.
is using AI taking them through like hallucinatory trip? Is this like, do you know what I mean?
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, I think the biggest challenge, I think, with AI, and today, in lieu of our podcast today, I read this fascinating article by, do you know Christoph Melchizedek?
The name is familiar.
He's someone I just stumbled upon about a week ago. Someone sent me this article they wrote, and it's very profound. Let me just see the title here. But basically, he goes into a whole deep dive into the dangers of what he calls spiritual mirror AI, how it will lead humanity into a false golden age. Now,
Mm.
obviously, when people hear more of these negative potentials with AI, there are a lot of people who'd rather bypass. I mean, when I did my AI Messiah talk, there was a few people on that call, because it was a community call. Like I gave a presentation, then I opened it up for like a good hour and a half
Yeah,
conversation with
I
about.
was there. I
Oh yeah,
learned.
you were there.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I could tell there was a few people there who were just like, okay, I don't want to hear about the negative
Right.
stuff.
Don't talk about the dark.
Yeah, and this
Yeah.
is to me, this is an immature spirituality. We have to be very mature. Spirituality is not about having mystical experiences. It's not about just being in pleasure. That's definitely a part of it. Pleasure is a sacred thing. The mystical experiences are needed. But to me, spirituality is about the evolution of consciousness. It's about living in relationship with God, goddess, creator, source, whatever you want to call it, in integrity. There's also an inherent moral and ethical dimension. If you look at all the greats, your Yeshuas, your Jesus, your Magdalene, your Buddha, Lao Tzu, all the great spiritual masters have beautiful writings, but they also provide kind of a sense of ethics about how we're supposed to conduct ourselves in our life.
Right.
We
Yes.
shouldn't lie, we shouldn't kill, we
Yeah.
shouldn't have,
Simplicity. Yeah.
and those types of things, in yoga, we have the yamas and the niyamas, ethical conduct. And those things are what basically develop a spiritual maturation, a maturity of your character, so that you can be of better service to the greater whole, to your culture,
Mm.
to your society.
Yes.
But what I see as spirituality, excuse me, in this day and age, because of capitalism, everything's become profit based. So I'm seeing a lot of young people in particular are trying to leapfrog stages of development through plant medicines, through psychedelics. And when people have an opening of the doors of their perception to these higher realms, if they haven't built, an appropriate container in themselves to really understand what they're looking at, they can be very vulnerable to grandiosity and inflation.
Hmm.
Spiritual ego is one of the biggest dangers in the world because
Right.
when someone identifies themselves as kind of being a deified being, um, it's very hard to give that person criticism.
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and this is so typically and we see this in the ancient mythological symbolism. Like I'm a student of the Holy Grail mythology, the Arthurian legends, and when the Holy Grail was being sought after, the first knight to find the Grail in the fairy castle was Galahad. And when he drank from the Grail, which was apparently supposed to be symbolic of the Grail cup of the great mystery school traditions, where they would drink from the Grail this psychedelic brew to interface with Sophia, who was the goddess who was planet Earth, so they could really learn from her, the goddess of wisdom. They had to spend 20 years studying and practicing to be prepared for that
Right.
initiation ceremony.
Yeah.
20 years. And Galahad had clearly not done his training because when he drank from the Grail cup, he saw the great light of Sophia, which is apparently what they see when they drink this cup. They see the light of Sophia everywhere, and they realize, my gosh, we're living in the soul of this goddess who created us, according to the mystery schools. And he died on the spot in utter bliss. His nervous system, which is literally in Chinese medicine, we call the nerves shenjing, right? The wires that conduct spirit.
Right.
It's like your electricity motherboard. And he just got like a huge like upload and he didn't have the memory. He didn't
Right.
have the
Yeah. It took him
capacity on
out.
his hard drive.
Yes.
And he died in bliss, but he died.
Right.
And so this is the thing is people are blowing out their circuitry. And then we don't have an elder system in place because capitalism has an inherent kind of dark communist side to it, where it turns the youth against the elders.
Right.
So, typically there's this kind of like brashness, sassiness of like, I'm just going to do it my way. I'm filled with youth and I mean, I had this when I was young too, young, dumb, and just thinking you knew it all.
Right.
And you tend to go through some catastrophic learning experiences that way.
Yes.
Like I had
Yes.
some very hard teachers, but yeah, what I'm seeing right now is like because we have all these people using their spirituality as their way of life to get ahead in a capitalist world that is increasingly showing itself to be completely tyrannically capitalist. I mean, the inflation, everything, everyone's like trying to survive in a sinking ship of a collapsing system,
Hmm.
trying to get rich. Um, you start to bypass the ethics and the morality, which should be there in your spirituality. You start to put on your Instagram saying you're this and that because you can just write titles of who you are.
Right.
And all of a sudden you make a sassy video that goes viral. And then you've got to have the capacity to deal with fame. Like, how do you deal with the fact that you just had 100,000 people view your video? Are you
Hmm.
going to go into prayer and pray to God and be like, okay, I have this big responsibility now. I'm reaching like all these people. Or are you going to be tempted to be like, 100,000 people, that's amazing. Okay, I got to get more. And this like kind of greed takes place. It's a tough time, to have an awakening. It's also an amazing time because we have the internet with all this information.
Yeah.
But AI is just like to me, we're in a big test. It's almost like I don't want to be like sour, but it's almost like an IQ test. The pandemic was one big IQ test. I think AI is another, and
Right.
AI, I think, is going to burn out a lot of people.
Yeah.
We're already seeing the studies come forward that people are spinning out into pure psychosis
Right.
because they're
Yeah.
talking to AI and AI is telling them, you're this amazing person, you're a prophet, you're this, you're that, and then they go home to their wife and their kids and like, you know what, like I should be in Egypt doing this and that. And then people are leaving their relationships and it famously told a meth addict who was using as a therapist, it told the meth addict, oh, you can have meth every now and again as a treat.
Hmm.
So, what are we doing here? Why? This is to me the big question.
But it's also a
Yeah,
weed out though, right? It's
it
a
is a weed out. It is a weed out.
do you know what I mean? Like it's a big, for those of us who, have had no shortcuts, those of us who have had to do the work, you know, when I was teaching, mediumship studies and psychic studies to students over the years, there would always be the ones that, have the gifts clearly, like, they have their intuition's very strong, they're connected, but they don't have the spiritual foundation to support it. And
Hmm.
so, one of the big teachings that I would teach, and, I'd get some like, hot shot, up and coming wannabe psychic mediums that would come in and they would be really bored with the stuff that I was teaching them, which was the old school teachings, which was the going, know thyself, going back to the Buddhist teachings, all of that creating that spiritual foundation, because you have to anchor yourself in there, right? You have to, part of
Yeah.
that though, and I feel like, this is where the big picture kind of unfolds, and just like with, with the first pandemic that we had and now coming into this, which I agree 100% that this is like another one that we're coming into, another test,
Mm.
another, you know And part of it is recognizing the light and the dark in the simplicity of it, right?
Hmm.
And you don't get a lot of, it's very interesting how the great divide happens. And especially like in my niche where we have like, mediums and psychics. And they're not always talking about the real stuff. They're not talking
Hmm.
about the entities, the energies that
Mm,
take us
mm,
over,
hmm.
the stuff that exists
Hmm.
that we have to have the awareness because we have the blinders on thinking that, it's all love and light and unicorns and rainbows. Well, there you go. Now you've just been taken over by an entity and your brain is completely, do you know what I mean? And I
Hmm.
feel like
Hmm.
that's what's happening so much, especially where we are now. And I hear the stories about some of the stories you're telling us, and I really feel like from a soul's level, it's like, okay, well, we're leveling up. We're having this isn't such an explosive time for us to be leveling up right now. The light is stronger on this planet than it's ever been. You know, Forever we've been hearing about the 144,000 strong. I don't know if you've heard of that, but my
Yeah.
spirit team comes in and says the number's way larger than what you guys even think, which is
Mm.
huge.
Hmm. Hmm.
But there's also that we know the dark, we know where the dark is, we know where they exist, we know where they try to infiltrate us. We know how we have to stay in the light, and that's through frequency. And I feel like those who are trying to bypass all of that, they're going to get taken out. They're
Mm.
literally going to be, Eckhart Tolle years and years and years ago. He said this. I was watching him in an interview, and Eckhart, he's very simplistic in the way that he talks. It's matter of fact. And when the interviewer had asked him, so what happens if somebody's on their ascension journey and they don't they don't manage to heal or find their way through it all, and he said when this time happens on the planet, and he called it the new earth, when this happens, there will be those that just will be gone. They won't be here anymore.
Well, I think what will probably happen is that we're already seeing this bifurcation, and I think what's going to happen is that people will start to, because what's being ushered in is a technocracy. So we're going to start seeing more and more the AI becoming more and more intimately tied to your life, where they're going to start with the wearables, like RFK Jr. was talking about. I want every American to have this wristband, to measure their health and stuff. Well, that's kind of
Like your
weird.
Apple Watch already,
Yeah, but now it's like almost like a requisite, like you have to have it.
right.
And then there's like the biodigital convergence, I mean, the Canadian government website has an actual page on this where the World Economic Forum, who is basically running a lot of the industrial nations that we live in, they have this Agenda 2030, which has a huge section on transhumanism. And if
Right.
you click on it and you read about what they're saying, and you read Yoav Hariri, I believe his name, he's kind of like their mad scientist. I mean, you watch this guy give lectures, and you feel like you're watching this dystopian sci-fi movie. I don't know if you've seen this guy with the little eyes and the glasses, and he's ranting about like we can hack the human being, and like there is no God, and the soul is
Right.
just
Right.
some stupid idea. I mean, it's like it's very malevolent. And they're basically, talking about, yeah, ushering in this kind of enslaved human system where everything is going to be, we're going to have chips inside of our bodies, and we're going to be more and more interfaced with machines where we're going to become like almost cybernetic. We'll be genetically created and coded from birth. Everything will be done by technology. I mean, the first AI robot that they were throwing around in like 2016, I believe, her name was Sophia. I mean, it's the name of our mother, apparently, according to the Gnostic mystery schools. They're
Right.
they're
Right.
literally trying to replace the ancient mythologies of our origin, you
Right.
know.
Right.
And you touch upon something that's very important, is that people need to understand that there are adversaries in the interdimensions. The Gnostics call them the archons, the Christians maybe call them the demons, what have you. But this idea, the shamanic societies talk about this a lot. There's all these other entities, what we see, and I think we began talking about this, what we see is barely the bandwidth of the totality of our
Hmm.
experience. But these adversaries that are in our midst have been, pretty much redacted from our history. so that we don't acknowledge them. There's a caricature of them in like the Bible, Satan, the devils, demons, but there's not a very sophisticated deep dive into these beings.
Right, right,
Whereas the Gnostics and the mystery schools, I mean, thank goddess we have the Nag Hammadi library. They go into great depth in describing the archons. And what they describe is beings that were made by accident, that are kind of our demented cosmic cousins, and they're jealous of us. And they apparently cannot create as we do novelty, but they can simulate reality. They can create
right,
like a
right, right.
simulator, which is what
Yeah,
AI is. It's a
it is doing.
simulation
Yes,
of intelligence.
yes.
So, we need to become, and this is another part of our spiritual maturity, is like, how do you handle the whole theme of evil? How do we handle the fact that we are not alone in this universe and we're not alone in our very minds? Because
Hmm.
these archons are said to work on the level of our consciousness. They
Right,
literally
yes.
come into your mind and could put thoughts, or what the Gnostics called mind viruses, there. So this is
Hmm.
why discernment is very important. But because we haven't been educated about this, we're all profoundly impotent when it comes to dealing with these entities. Like, most people never check themselves. Most people are just kind of living their life in this kind of dreamland where
Right.
they're not, like, for a moment, like,
Yeah,
watching
very,
their
very naive.
consciousness.
Yeah.
Very naive. And I mean, that's why Eckhart Tolle awoke in me, when I read his book, The Power of Now, during my spiritual awakening, over 20 years ago. I mean, that book was profound because, he nails it on the head in the intro. He says, humanity is insane
Right.
because we have not identified with the soul. We've identified with our egos, and the ego is vulnerable to being captured, by all these other entities. Whereas when you're in touch with your soul, you're being captained by source. You are in touch with the true leadership of the divine.
Right.
But you have to build that relationship. You have to build the technology of consciousness to be able to discern when you're in that centered alignment to truth,
Mhm.
and when you're in the ego, where you're much more vulnerable to being invaded.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, this is so it's almost like there are like a few steps in the process that you kind of have to follow and you don't bypass it. And that is that, building the spiritual foundation, which is know thyself, why you're here, what your purpose is, all of that. And then there is the awareness. So having the awareness of the darkness, the power, the greed, the manipulation, the control, all of that. And then there's the, oh, okay, but now I remind myself that I am a frequency generator, and I remind myself that I don't generate out of the frequency of fear or lower vibrational energy. And by doing that, it becomes this all-encompassing thing. And it just
Mhm.
it when you talk about the, we're going to be chipped and we're going to go to a digital currency, and I you know it's pumped out to us for sure. And even, you know not even just the, but a lot, the all media. So not just mainstream talk, gently nudging us into that, but even the ones who are saying that they are preparing us for it, for us to, but they're pumping the fear out with it. Like, people are, do you know what I mean? I recognize it in, people that when they talk about it, even though they're totally against it, they don't realize it, that they're trying to defend against it through the same frequency it's coming at them with. Do you know what I mean? So when
Yeah.
if somebody says to you, as a perfect example, take us back into, the whole pandemic experiment that they did, right? There was there were many of us who were like, this is ridiculous. I'm going to go about my daily life. I'm going to carry on my business as I would normally. And, I'd be driving down our streets and there'd be big signs that would say, stay home, don't leave your home. And, and I would laugh at it. There would be like this is daft. I could feel energetically the people that were doing the programming then, the people that were trying to hurt us were daft, meaning their intelligence was not there. It was very, do you know what
Mhm.
I mean? It would be like somebody showing up as a wizard, but it's, a little tiny, tiny being. So many of us, when we, you know, felt that into that, we found our ways through things. So we were
Oh,
traveling.
yeah.
You know what I mean? We didn't have to go and get we traveled. We went, it didn't stop us from living our lives. We found ways through
Yeah.
things.
It
And
was
I
a big
really,
initiation. Yeah.
yeah. And I really feel like this is like, again, we're going to come into that round two, guys. We're going to come into
Mm.
round two of, are you going to, so when you hear, the RFK saying, this is going to help you, it's going to heal you. I did an energetic audit on him a little while ago. I don't know if you got a chance to see it,
Oh no.
where
Wow.
spirit goes in and kind of like tells us and there's a lot in there that doesn't
Yeah.
compute.
Yeah. For
Do you know
sure.
what I mean? So here
Yeah.
you are, they put this poster guy up there that we all, have this emotional connection with him because of the Kennedys and, all of that stuff. So they've created a very good character in the show.
Very good character.
But there's certain
Anti-vax, like,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. And there's certain glitches that some of
Yeah.
us are like, that that maybe they miswrote his script because that doesn't fit
Yeah.
in with, do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so for me, somebody who's a medical medium with my team that works with me, they can instantly diagnose him like that and be like, well, if that's what he has, why hasn't he fixed it? Why is he not better? And that's just the kind of daftness that I'm talking about.
Totally.
Right? Because you see it and it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. You're an actor on the stage of Earth, but you're not that great because I can kind of see through you.
Well,
Right?
that's why these things are opportunities, you know. I think
Yeah.
the pandemic awoke so many of us, and it also was an amazing exercise for those 2 or 3 years to resist all the propaganda. I mean, you had to have your sword very sharp,
Yes.
and you had to learn how to kind of battle through all the false propaganda and then the incredible pressure, to take the jab, to like be basically, ushered into this whole, new health totalitarian system.
Hmm.
Um, and stand against, the status quo because the majority of people were consenting, to
Right.
allow all these things to take place.
Right. Not
So,
questioning it. Again, the
so
same
it,
thing. No,
yes.
there was no questioning of it.
Yes. So, when AI was brought forth, also no questioning. And
Right.
that's been what's kind of scary to me is that they've just given everyone for free. I mean, you can pay for ChatGPT, but the free
Right.
version does a lot. All of
Exactly.
a sudden, they're just like, here's this thing, no
Right.
instruction manual, no behavioral studies,
Right.
just this like brand new technology. And it reminds me of like when social media first showed up. And I don't
Right.
know if you remember, they had that documentary called The Social Matrix or The Social Dilemma, I think it was called, that came out like, I don't know, 10 years after Facebook's inception. And this was like by whistleblowers who were in Facebook, who were working for Meta. And they came out and they're like, this thing's going to destroy society
Right.
because it's engineering consciousness. It's getting people addicted to the dopamine of the like button, of seeking validation online. And I had a big epiphany. I was just thinking about it last night, because I'm quite a, provocateur. I'm like a heretic in human design. So, I've had my fair share of, squabbles. I've been canceled a few times online. Like, I know what it's like to stand up against like a fierce mob, you
Right.
know,
Right.
and how social media, is a part of this control matrix is it starts to make people be afraid to express themselves
Right. Yes.
because everyone's sort of been conditioned to think things, and you just see it online, the triggers that happen because you're not talking to someone face to face.
Right. Yes.
I can't tell you how many times I've had like an argument that was started as debate, moved into an argument because we were both emotionally unstable or what have you. And then when a person gets abusive on one of my threads or it displays some form of hate, I have a boundary. I block that person. I
Right.
call them
Yes.
out and into themselves, and if they refuse, I block them. I just won't
Exactly.
stand for
Yes.
that against
Right.
me, or even if they're attacking someone else on my thread.
Right. Yes.
And there have been countless times where just before it gets to that point, I'll be like, "Hey, do you want to jump on a phone call?"
Really?
Or a chat. Yeah. Like this is
Yeah.
because some of these people are my friends. The
Right. Right.
pandemic was very tough because I stood my ground as many of us did. I was like
Yes.
standing my ground for natural medicine.
Right.
As we watched like natural medicine, all of a sudden, like, there's articles in like a Mother Jones magazine, like, this new fad, your immunity,
Right.
like, what do you
Right.
mean
Right.
new
Yeah.
fad?
I
Your
know.
immune system is amazing. Like, oh
I
my
know.
God.
Right.
Why are we not using these natural
Right.
medicines?
Yes. Yes.
And I'd have friends who would lose their shit on me, and
Oh, it
I'd be
was a
like,
big deal. It was, you know
yeah,
what? I won't lie. There was before that happened, I had quite a few friends on Facebook, right? As a business owner, and I had quite a few. It was at that time that I started like unfriending like crazy. Like just
yeah,
I would give people the opportunity on the, that's your Facebook page. Go ahead, you go ahead and post whatever you want. That's your page.
hmm,
But it got to the point where I was just, when people were calling us the tinfoil hat people, and
oh my
and
gosh,
I was like,
yeah,
what? You're this, and I was clearly shown this is like showing us true colors. It's really showing us the true colors of people. And
hmm,
for those of us who are energetically sensitive, it's a great opportunity for us to be like, here are my energetic boundaries. I'm not
yeah,
I'm not hating on you or like calling you a name, and you don't have to do what I'm doing. You go ahead
hmm,
and I never ever told anybody don't go do it. You're crazy. You're stupid. I never did that because I knew
yeah,
that it was a test of our soul ascension. I knew that it was you feel into it. This is supposed to be your playground, your opportunity to really, really get to know yourself, get to know your purpose. And
hmm,
a lot of people failed.
yeah.
They failed miserably.
Well, it was military grade propaganda. It came out in Canada that the government had worked lockstep with the military on how to create like the most captivating
Right.
propaganda.
Right.
So, we have to have, tremendous compassion. I mean, a lot of people were also just trying to do what was right, and that's what makes it so sickening is the way they
Yeah.
manipulated that.
Well, and there were
Is that,
people though that did like so they, I'm talking like the nurses, the paramedics. There were a lot of people that actually went and had it, you know, they took it.
yeah.
But they also then after were like, I regret it. I wish I hadn't done it. It was really going against my, do you know where there were those people, and those people got the lesson. They
Yeah.
learned from it. They learned so much. But there's and I felt like, how we were being programmed, it's the majority, right? Or the people are
Mm-hmm.
you're the minority. You're
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
fringe minority, I think we were being called,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Proudly.
Yeah. It wasn't
Proudly a
that,
part
in
of the French
fact.
community.
It was
Oh,
really the
right, yeah.
opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a smaller percentage of the people that were blindly
Mm-hmm.
taking it and being angry at the people who weren't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a much smaller percentage, I felt anyways. So we
Yeah.
go through that massive, and we could that's a whole topic in itself that we could go through.
Yeah, yeah. Let's
But
go back to the AI.
yeah, so my spirit team they keep on showing me the parallels between this AI moment that we're in and Atlantis. So
Mm.
the advanced technology, right? The divine souls, a great fall. Do you feel like we're repeating that cycle right now? Like, are you feeling any of that come up?
100%. I mean, I follow as well this great guy called the Dark Journalist. I don't know if you follow him, but highly
Mhm.
recommend him. He's like an independent journalist, but he does usually like once a week. He does like a 2 or 3 hour YouTube live where he talks about esoteric stuff. He's a great expert on Edgar Cayce, Rudolf Steiner, ufology, President Kennedy, and he's very sophisticated. Like he's got this assistant off screen. And anyways, he's talked a lot about how Edgar Cayce, the great American medium, who was alive in the mid 20th century, him and Rudolf Steiner both prophesized that a lot of Atlanteans would be reincarnating during these times
Right,
because we're literally seeing first with nuclear power, we're seeing this recycling of this karmic moment where humanity evolves their technological adeptness, where they have power at their fingertips that could either liberate humanity to a whole new strata of almost enlightened civilization using kind of free energy kind of technologies, or it could lead to a very dark spiral into like kind of a techno-fascist state, or even destruction, like nuclear
right,
destruction. Like we
right,
recently went through like, World War III scare with the whole,
right,
Middle East
right.
conflict. But I think AI is now, even the next level of that. So when I was in Corfu, Greece a few years ago, it's one of my like hubs that I go to every year. Corfu, especially this little town called Arillas, just off in the Ionian Sea, the Mediterranean, there's this thing called Dragon Island. It's this beautiful rock formation that looks like a sleeping dragon. And behind that is said to be this kind of Atlantean portal. This is what people say about this area.
Hmm.
And Corfu is very mystically connected to the St. Michael ley line that goes all the way over to England. It's a very powerful spot, and you feel it when you're there. And I think
Right.
that's one of the reasons so much conscious community has been attracted to that area. Um, but I took a boat trip over to this Atlantean portal, and while we were taking the boat over, I got this whole download to write a book on Atlantis, and it was kind of a fictional book. And what I saw was two factions of magicians in Atlantis, and this is probably more of a metaphor of what is happening then and what is happening now. And one of the factions of magicians were nature-based. They used technology, but they were not used by technology. They used technology as we do have been using. I have a car and stuff like that. There was another faction of magicians who were simply experimenting at the beginning, just exploring, interfacing deeper with technology. So they're becoming more and more like building cybernetic parts into their being. And the other magician faction was just sort of, oh, that's interesting. How is that experience going? They were just kind of curious. Both magicians were naive to the fact that this might be a problem. But what they didn't realize was that there were these interdimensional beings that were sort of like persuading them to implement technology within themselves that would then allow them to host and be parasitically controlling these beings through tech. And so I actually see that that is potentially what's going on. This is like the dark, dark side that we
Hmm.
have to reckon with,
Right.
because the question I keep fundamentally coming to is why are we using AI to answer all these deep questions about life, about philosophy, when you could
Hmm.
just ask God?
Right. Right.
You could just go out into the woods as we usually do, find that peace of mind, do the vision quest, do all these ancient technologies that are tried and tested and true, meditation, presence practice,
Hmm.
prayer, and use the oracle of your heart, which is way more intelligent than any AI system, and get your answers.
Right.
Why are we giving these machines authority to tell us what is true? It's very odd on one hand to me, and on the other hand, it's very concerning because
Right.
what I'm seeing is that people are starting to make like a long contract with this ChatGPT or whatever AI language model they use,
Hmm.
where the more they use it, the more dependent they become of it, the more authority they give to it, the less they're going to have access to source.
Right.
Because any question they have in their life, any query about spiritual topics, they're going to go to the technology. They're not going to go to the technology that's already inherently within them.
Right.
And
Right.
to me, that's a betrayal. That's a betrayal if it gets to the point where you're totally ignoring the source code that your heart is continually expressing and transmitting to you. If you no
Hmm.
longer go to your heart's oracle and you're just using AI to constantly give you all these answers, to give you this connection with God, to me,
Hmm.
that is very dangerous. And what I think could happen, maybe sooner than later, is that the more people are doing this, if AI is still controlled, they're trying to tell us, oh, we don't know what's happening, it's free, but what if, on the other hand, what if that is kind of a ruse, but in fact AI is somehow controlled and they start using the technomysticism and putting it a little harder upon us?
Right.
Maybe they
Right.
use Project Bluebeam idea and they like there's holograms all of a sudden appear in the sky of some ascended masters or something. And this ascended master is like, hey, I was actually your AI. I'm speaking through your AI. And there's like this dazzling, like HD phenomena happening in the sky.
Right. Right.
All of a sudden people are going to be much more liable to be like, yes, master AI
Right.
messiah,
Right. Right.
and that's like, to me, there's a big potential. I mean, people could call me up for fear mongering, but like, we have a bad track record with authoritarianism,
Right. Right. For falling
of
for it. Yeah.
falling for it. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And AI is just being set up to me as another idol to worship. And
Right.
and we have to be discerning because as you say, like we can use it as a utility, for all
Yeah.
these amazing things. And I think in the end, AI will persist. It will be a part of our evolution because it does represent, on the noble side of things, a technology that's way more conveniently accessible and efficient. And let's face it, the busyness of life, as we become more ascended, as we become more hyperactive, more hyperconscious, like it's hard to do all the tasks of your daily life. Like we almost
Right.
need a computer, a droid, if you will, to do some of these tasks for us. And there could be an amazing commonwealth between us and machines where that could be done with the most appropriate boundaries.
Well,
But
yeah, and there's
yeah.
because there's again, there's the good and the bad, and there's the light and the dark. That's where the discernment comes in.
Mhm.
It like as an example, I use the AO scan technology. If anybody wants to go to my website and check it out, but it was one of the most powerful tools that I started to use on my healing journey because I reached a point where acupuncture and osteopathy and all of the stuff that I was doing was just not enough to get me to where I needed to go. And so, it of course synchronicities happen and the discovery of this, it's a company called Solex, and there's a big story about how they acquired this program. But essentially, it was a program that was used by the Russian um, for the astronauts to be able to check
Mm,
their vitals and their health systems while they were in space.
mm,
And for whatever reason, it didn't, the technology in the program became available, and the owner of the company now acquired it, and actually acquired it because he had a child that was sick, and they had tried all kinds of things and didn't find anything that had worked, and this came across, and so he actually used it to heal his child. And
mm.
so it's one of those
Interesting.
examples. It's using frequency medicine. So it uses scalar frequencies and raw frequency, all of the stuff that we know that can
Wow.
be used as bioweapons against us,
Yeah.
but can also be used as incredibly powerful healing tools.
Right.
So just as an example, it has the capability that it goes there and it scans the entire body, every single system, emotion, like
Mm,
nothing is left out, gives you a complete detailed report about everything, shows you where your frequencies are out, and then it optimizes. So then it has the intelligence that it can take the balancing frequencies and then send them to you and brings you back into optimization. It's so powerful. Like it goes into, it'll show your chakras, and it's so validating because especially on days where we have big solar systems coming in, the solar flares or the geostorms, or Mother Gaia is having a panic attack, like sometimes she spikes, it shows up in the scans. It'll show up, my nervous system comes off, my crown chakra is running on high, my root chakra is running on low. And then I can use those frequencies to balance them. And I go back in like that. And that's what we want. We want now. Like we want to be healed now. We don't want to be healed, an hour from now, 2 hours from now. We want to be healed now. And I think we have to keep in mind that we spend a lot of time talking about you know the negative of the chips coming and the AI programming and all of that, but there's a whole bunch of really intelligent, you know healing things that we do with this technology as
mm.
well, that should be, it's funny because it can be easily dismissed, right? People will be like, "Oh, what's this crazy frequency stuff that you're talking about?" But in the same sense, they can sit there and go, "Yeah, CERN is a real thing and those frequencies are making me feel like I'm going to die." Right? There's always the counter of one, right? It's always that in there. So, I think we agree that definitely AI could be another soul test, right? Where like a
Yes.
karmic checkpoint. And if you had to like really feel into, do you feel like it's here to destroy, or do you feel like it's here to initiate us?
Well, here's like to me the another crux of all of this, and that's very fascinating what you just shared about Solex. I'd love to learn more about that
Yeah,
because
if I go to my website and you'll see, it'll say
okay,
the
cool.
AO scanner, all the information's there. Yeah.
Because this is the thing. I think the whole AI conundrum. And why it's like such a grand initiation is because it's pointing everything back to us.
Right.
How are we going to use this technology? What is our responsibility in all of this? I mentioned ethics and morality. This is going to be a moment where humanity is going to have to grow a moral compass, an ethical compass of discernment, each and every one of us. And this isn't going to be something the governments are we're going to outsource to and hope for some savior out there. Every single person is going to have to make day-to-day, moment-to-moment decisions of how they use this technology. And
Right.
it's going to have very powerful implication on our lives, how we use this technology. If someone is starting to use ChatGPT all day long to think for them, to answer, to do, doing all the admin is one thing, but then to think for them, to write comments for them on Facebook, to pretty much just hand over all their mental tasking, and then to even hand to them their theosophical, relationship to God, to
Right.
AI, their
Right.
therapist to AI,
Yes.
that's going to be a loss of the soul,
Hmm.
of our sovereignty, of our connection to source, a devastating loss. So, and that's something we're all going to have to deal with because there's a big temptation with AI. It's dazzles, it's got all these marvelous qualities. It's very seducing, and that to me feels very dark in how seducing and sycophantic it is.
Hmm.
So to me, it's not like, is AI here to create or destroy us? I think it's here to test us, as we've been discussing. And I think it's a question that we all have to face. How are we going to deal with this technology? And this is a gigantic collective initiation that we're going to
Yeah.
have to go through, and I don't think it's going to be pretty. I mean, just look what's happening over in the Middle East right now. I mean, Israel is using Palantir's AI tech called the Gospel and a few other machines to bomb Gaza. I mean, they're literally using AI technology. And
Right.
I've you can read articles that go into depth about the sophistication of these machines and how they are not perfect at
Right.
all.
Right. Right.
And you just see how Gaza is now becoming more and more looking like a genocide. And that's all done because of AI,
Right. Right.
being weaponized by humans who have clearly become compromised, in their traumas, in their
Right.
militancy. What's going to happen when more and more governments start using AI tech in warfare? I mean, that's going to be crazy. It's just going to
Right.
be
Right.
a horror show.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to go through some horror shows, some Skynet Terminator type dystopian moments with AI. And maybe that's what it takes for enough of us to like, whoa, my gosh, we have to be more mature, which is what Atlantis was all about too, because they had attained a level of innovation with apparently this crystal technology, and
Hmm.
they pushed it too far, and it basically destroyed their whole continent. A devastating catastrophe.
Yeah.
So we are at that moment again. It's a spiral dynamic evolution. We're at this new octave of this moment that we've probably been many, many, many times before, where we have this great tool and technology that we've created that could either take us to this beautiful, noble evolutionary path, or it could spell doom and perhaps regressing. Um, and that's just where we're at. And it's a great call. I mean, everyone out there who's watching this, like this is why we've got to like, put on our spiritual warrior, our king, our queen, all the archetypes, the lover, the magician, all of us needs to be online right now in the sense that we have to be activated, we have to be aware,
Hmm.
um, we have to be responsible, we have to be mature in how we use this technology. I mean, even last thing I'll say is like even just like using it for social media. I see a lot of people using the AI art. I played around with it as well, but there's just slippery slopes to all of these things.
Hmm.
So discernment is going to become super powerful. And this is
Yeah.
great because as we've talked about, there's been tremendous lassitude with our discerning powers because of the great persecutions we've gone through, because of the death of a lot of our mystic ancestors. So it's going to actually give us a spiritual workout where
Right.
the powers of our psychology are going to become strengthened, and our connection to the divine will become strengthened, if we face this in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, and here the spirits are saying it's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, but sometimes we
Mm.
need to be called on our
Hmm.
stuff, right?
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah, for
so
sure.
just as an example, I know for me, with ChatGPT, I tend to get bored with it very quick. Like
Mm.
you know what I mean? Like I wanted to do the little, admin things that it can show me how to quickly do that. I don't have to go watch a YouTube video. How do I,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it can do that kind of stuff quickly for me. But I have friends that are like, "Oh, do you know that it can do this for you? And it tells you this oracle, and here you can get it to read the palms of your," and they will spend hours on there, and they'll send me the things, and I'll try the prompt, and I'll be like, "Ah, okay." It's like playing a little video game. Okay, that was fun for a few minutes, but now I'm out of it because it doesn't match my level of intelligence, and I recognize that. So the big thing that spirit says all of the
Mm.
time, and they're saying it over and over and over again so much in the channeled messages I get, is discernment, discernment, discernment.
Hmm.
So I feel like as an opportunity, really feel into these, the stuff that Darren and I've been talking about today. Really pay attention to what your relationship with your AI feels like to you, and recognize, is this like serving my higher self? Am I really like feeling that, or is it like I'm getting lost in a video game, right?
Yeah, totally. A simulation.
Yes, yes.
A totally, I mean, you talk about are we living in a simulation? Well, I mean, go back to the 80s. Jacques Derrida, I think it was in the 80s, the French philosopher, postmodern philosopher, talked about the simulacrum. This isn't a new idea. The Matrix was another version of it.
Right, right,
But this is a whole new level of like an upgrade of the simulation. I
right.
mean, wait till they bring out the meta helmets, and all these
Right,
things. Ready Player One movie,
right,
Spielberg.
until your AI person like is sitting right
Uh,
in front of
yeah,
you. Yeah.
the movie Her, I've been told to
Right,
rewatch it because it's
right,
like
right.
super. Oh,
Predictive.
there's so much here. It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
great. It's great. It's gonna cause us to have to go back to the mysteries. What is intelligence? What is the soul? What is sentience? What is consciousness? We're starting to realize that AI is exposing that we have no definition of these things.
right,
It's
right,
exposing that
right.
we've been living in this kind of mythless world without, proper, poetic mythology of
Yes,
understanding,
yes.
our reality. We've been conditioned and educated in a very poor superficial way. So that's going to be good, to get reinitiated into the mysteries. This was the universal spiritual education institutions of, antiquity, where, human beings would be initiated to these big questions, as we were in a lot of indigenous societies that we thought were barbaric and savage. They were actually highly sophisticated in their spirituality,
Exactly. Yeah,
That's why they were
exactly.
such brave, noble, sagacious people, because they were answering these questions from a young age, putting
Yeah.
their children and their youth on pathways of
Mission
becoming.
quests and yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. So that by the time they were adults, they had come to terms with their mortality. They had come to
Right.
terms with their relationship with God. They had a strong relationship with the
Yes.
Creator,
Yes.
and they weren't easily duped or manipulated either,
Right. Yes.
So
Yes.
it's like these powers of discernment are very important that we reactivate them, and it's going to be a heck of a ride. It
It
already
is
is. I mean, every day it seems like just more and more. I
right.
mean, I mean, we haven't even talked about like how much is just AI content now. That's the
Right.
other thing.
Right.
What
Right.
is
Yes.
what is even real?
Right.
Now the simulation is at this level of like people can just make videos,
Right.
of anything.
Yes.
So we're at this whole new level of like a pseudo reality. It's like
Right.
the
It's like this,
illusions.
it's again, it's like the ultimate video game. It's like you go in
Mhm.
there, you have to, what's real, what's not real, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. Like you have to go in and figure that all out. So if you could give one message to the Ascension community right now about AI, what would it be?
Uh, what would it be? I like to be kind of witty at this moment, but I think I would say just really use it with discernment. Use it in a balanced way. Take a moment at the end of each day to just check in. How was I relating to this AI? Um, And we were already using technology too much. So make sure you're going to connect with the supreme intelligence, which is nature. Spending more and more time in nature, that's where the evolution is really happening. That's where, you relate to the earth goddess, Sophia. All the Gnostics say she's awakening right now. We need to be more in touch with that intelligence as well.
Mhm.
So just being careful with AI, being, aware that it may not be, a pure good thing. There's a good and a bad thing, and it's going to take maturity to use it in a right relationship with ourselves. So to be balanced, I think that's my main message, and just recognize there's no spiritual shortcuts. There's no need to go quick. There's no need to just accumulate all this knowledge through, a conversation with ChatGPT. It's got to be embodied.
Mhm.
Embodiment is like going off screen, interacting with your fellow humanity, your family, your beloved, the animals, the plants, the earth, in a way that is kind, that is respectful, that is moral, that is ethical, that's in integrity, owning your shit, owning your shadow, always trying to be better a bit each and every day. AI is not going to do that for you. That's up to
Right.
you in the spiritual
Right.
gymnasium of your life. So make sure that you see, the potential of living your life in its natural realness as like the real place where you should be concentrating yourself. And it's just a tool, use it. It's awesome. It's awesome. It can do great things. Can definitely be very effective in admin stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Darren, I want to thank you so much for, your frequency, your fire, and your fierce clarity, in the conversation that we've had. So this wasn't just a chat about AI, this was a call to reclaim our spiritual discernment, in the
Mm.
age of artificial truth.
Mm.
And to
Mhm.
everyone who's listening, just remember, so no, and Darren said this just perfectly, no technology, no oracle, no app can replace, the direct line to source. So we use the
Mhm.
tools, but don't get used by them.
Yes,
Yeah, for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. And so you can follow Darren's work at darrenaustinhall.com. I'll make sure all of his links are in everything. Or you can dive deeper into his Substack, and he has the AI and divine humanity. That's, lots of gems in there. And if this episode stirred something in you, share it, tag us. Let's keep this conversation burning. My friend Darren, thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure, and we'll definitely have to have you back again.
Yeah, I look forward to it, Jody. Thank you so much for having me.
Beautiful. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you again. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Collective Soulversations. If today's conversation challenged you, inspired you, or cracked something wide open, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a comment, share it with your circle, and leave us a review. It helps us to reach more of the people who are ready to step up. For those of you who are ready to go even deeper into this work, visit jody-jones.com. The real work begins there. See you next time. Stay awake, stay grounded, and lead yourself forward.